that, I know a lot of students want to know how to prepare. So that's what I was hoping to talk about today. So if you're just joining, feel free to ask a question in the comments. I'm going to be talking about how to help you prepare for the AP Lang exam and also what to expect on the AP Lang exam, because I found that actually a lot of students don't really realize what the exam is like, and that could be something that we could fix very easily. So maybe that's a good starting point. Let's talk about what you actually need to know for the exam itself. So on test day, first of all, the test is going to be 8 a.m. for your time zone. And there's going to be some like beginning materials and stuff they have to tell you on exam day, but you're going to start with multiple choice. So that's going to be 2 reading passages and 3 writing passages. So the reading is like reading comprehension, the writing is more like editing. Personally, I like the writing questions better, just preference, because I feel like they're a little bit easier. And then you get a 10-minute break, and then you get to actually do the FRQs, which are the essays, free response questions. And you have a total of 2 hours and 15 minutes for that. So technically you can kind of break that time up however you want. Now, they recommend 15 minutes for reading, and then they recommend like 40 minutes per essay. But a lot of my students spend maybe 10 minutes reading and prepping, especially for synthesis. And then that other 5 minutes, they kind of bank for the other essays. So you technically can split up that time however you want to. All right, awesome. It looks like we have a question. What can I do over the summer to prep for AP Lang? Okay, that's a great question. And honestly, the answer to this also is what students can be doing now if you're in the class. So one thing I would say to prepare for the exam is to just kind of broaden your knowledge. And I know that sounds like really like vague, but hear me out on this. The third question on the exam, the third essay, is an argument essay. And so because of that, you have to choose your own evidence. I use the acronym CHORES: current events, history, outside knowledge, reading, experience, and science. Other teachers use other acronyms. The acronym itself doesn't really matter. But if you can keep up with current events or historical events and just kind of get to know different topics, that'll help you with your argument essay. Because I think the hardest part of that particular essay is just coming up with your evidence. So that would be one thing. How you do that is choose topics you like, whether it's history, pop culture, whatever it is, sports. I've had students in the past who are athletes, and so we start with like their favorite athletes, and they just research that. So you can look at a podcast, you can listen to TED Talks. I would say even like honestly, okay, like you can technically like as you're scrolling through TikTok, you can learn useful information too. So you want to be paying attention to current events, history. So if you're in a history class, that's actually a great way to study. A lot of my students who are also in APUSH do really well with potentially like historically significant evidence. So that would be one thing that you could do to prepare, is just start to broaden your knowledge base. Thank you so much for the likes on TikTok, by the way. So the next thing I would say you could do to prepare for the exam or for the class, depending on which situation you're in, is to practice timed writing. Now, if you're preparing for the class over the summer, this might not be as helpful because you might not know like what type of writing to prepare for, and that's okay. But anytime you have a timed scenario in class, that can be really helpful to prepare for the exam. I start having my sophomores practice little timed scenarios, and then my AP students, we do more timed essays, especially in the spring semester. Like they've already done 2 since January, I think. And they're about to do a couple more coming up because we have a mock exam. So getting used to writing in like 40 minutes is really hard. It can be done. And remember, it's viewed as a rough draft on the exam, but that 40 minutes is what kind of is really tricky for people. So if you're taking AP Lang, just know that on the exam, it really helps if you have a short intro. And also you need usually at least 2 body paragraphs. Some people do 3. I have a lot of students who do 2. And honestly, if it were me writing the essay, in most cases, I would probably choose to do 2, because I'd rather use my time to write 2 quality paragraphs than like try to spread myself too thin with 3 body paragraphs. So 2 body paragraphs is totally okay. There's nothing wrong with 3, but it's okay to do 2. And then also, you don't technically need a conclusion, so don't stress about that either. That's the first thing to go. If you are running out of time, do not do a conclusion. All right, so let me see what we got here. All right, we got some questions coming in. How can it be easy to annotate reading books? Okay, so my students actually don't, well, they're reading books now kind of independently in like book circles, but I don't have them annotate a ton. So usually I would say if you're annotating, if it's for rhetorical analysis, you want to be looking for rhetorical choices and like meaningful like word choice or comparison or description, like whatever the choice is. Um, and usually you would just annotate in the margin. So um, I guess that would be the best thing. And then I would probably, if it were me, I would probably take notes on a separate sheet of paper, if I'm being honest, like things that I want to remember, because that could help. And if you're trying to study for AP Lang, and you're reading like nonfiction, there's some books that are pretty popular, like Just Mercy, Educated. Right now, half of my students are reading In Cold Blood, and they don't like it. They chose it, but they don't like it. I gave them a list, and they don't like that one. The other half of the class is reading, I'm probably gonna get the title wrong because I call it the FBI book. It's pretty new. Supposedly it's being made into a movie. It's something about like children, flower something. Oh gosh, I can't remember the title. I think it has flower in it, but it's about the FBI, and they are loving it because it's about like this, I guess like a serial killer in Oklahoma. Don't tell my students, but I'm not as caught up at reading it as much as they are. Like they're ahead of me. But they are really enjoying that book. So if you're reading a nonfiction book, that can be a way to prepare for the exam as well, depending on the prompt. That's the downside, is that we don't know what the argument prompt is going to be. But there's several like nonfiction books that are good, and you can just kind of annotate as you go. I'm reading Just Mercy right now, and we're having constant quizzes. See, yeah, I get why teachers do that. I don't really do that. So it's always hard for me to advise students how to prepare. I would just say like take notes on what you think is important, because it really depends on the questions your teacher is asking. Lang was an interesting class, but in retrospect, I think it did more damage to my writing than good. See, that kind of depends. Like I see where you're coming from, possibly if you feel like you like maybe had to write like formulaically, or if you had to put a lot of pressure on yourself to write in a timed scenario, I could see how that could be the case. But I also think the flip side is true for some students who don't have much exposure to that kind of writing and maybe haven't developed their writing voice yet. It's a great way for them to prepare for college. I feel like Lang is very different though. Like when I'm preparing my students for Lang, I'm really trying to teach them how to be strong writers, but I don't lose sight of the test, because a lot of my students are taking the class because they're trying to get that college credit. I also teach a concurrent credit English class, and that we have a lot, like, I don't want to say slower pace, but like I don't time them for essays. So same skills, different format. Can you expect more articles than books in AP Lang? That's a good question. It depends on your teacher. In my class, yes, we don't really read a lot of longer works. It's a lot of shorter works because the exam is shorter. There is a different class called AP Lit, and they have like one question where it's like an open-ended question about like a novel or a play. We don't have that in AP Lang. So my students read a lot of shorter stuff. Like literally the exam, the passage that you read for rhetorical analysis is between approximately 600 to 800 words. So it's like one page with 2 columns of text. Sometimes it goes on to the second page, like a little bit. So really it's not very much. So my students read shorter stuff. Not that everything is short, but like most of it is exam length. And that kind of thing. So, but like not every teacher does it that way. Some teachers incorporate a lot of novels because they have to, like maybe it's part of their school standards or their state standards. So I don't want to like mislead you. But like the exam itself is shorter works. We haven't really done timed essays. How can I self-study? Okay, that's a great question. I would first of all choose a prompt. And if it were me, I would choose something pretty recent. So it's 2023. Look at the 2022, 2021 exams. 2020 had rhetorical analysis only because that was the COVID year. And you can look at 2019 and 2018 because they rescored those with it was an old rubric, it was 9 points, and then they rescored them and it was a 6-point rubric. So you can use those essays still. And there's samples there, so you can kind of compare your rating to the essays themselves, which can be good. But I would start with the most recent ones. I don't really go back. Personally, I don't think I teach anything older than 2011. I teach a handful of prompts from like 2011 to 2015. Most of the stuff I teach is like 2017 onward because it's more current, like it's more in the style of the current test and things like that. I don't pull stuff from like the 90s, even though they did have the exam back then. So that's where I would start. And I would just like basically like time yourself if you want to. If like basically set a timer for 40 to 45 minutes. If it's synthesis, you can give yourself like 55 and just kind of see how it goes. And that's kind of a cold read. Or if you don't want to jump into it that way, what you can do is like give yourself as much time you need to like read and annotate and plan, and then time yourself for just 40 minutes to write. Because for some of the stuff that I'm having my students do right now is like they get to plan it like couple days before we talk about it in class, and then they have 40 minutes to write. So that's kind of like the baby step. That's actually probably where I would start, is just time yourself for about 40 minutes to write, but let yourself plan in advance. But you want to build to just like, here's a brand new prompt I've never seen before, and I want to write the essay in approximately 40 minutes. So that's what you can do on your own, but I would choose current prompts. And if you just type in AP Lang past exam prompts, you'll see prompts from all those years. Is it possible to make a mock exam by yourself? Yes. So what you would do is, well, it's kind of hard to do the multiple choice, but you can do the essays for sure. So I would just, if it were me, I would choose like do all the prompts from one year. So do all the 2022 prompts or all the 2021 prompts, rather than mixing and matching. Each year, this is just personal opinion, but it feels like there's always one prompt that's a little bit harder than the others. So last year, I feel like the question 3 prompt was the hardest. I'm trying to think the year before, which one was the hardest. Maybe question 3. It felt like an easy prompt, but I feel like that was the striving for perfection prompt. And I feel like a lot of people thought it was easy, but the essays maybe weren't as strong. Just personal opinion. But usually for my students, question 3 is the hardest. Just because you have to come up with your own evidence. So yeah, you can make your own mock by just looking for at like one of each of the essays from the same year. That'd be the easiest way. How should I prep for multiple choice if the teacher won't assign MCQs on Classroom? Okay, so if your teacher will not assign multiple choice questions, here's what you can do. You can kind of do like a sideways approach. So if you are also studying for the SAT or the ACT, start using those release tests. I would personally start with the SAT, even if you're taking the ACT, for 2 reasons. Number 1, there's more stuff available. And number 2, the College Board makes the SAT and they make AP Lang. It's not necessarily the same people on that committee, but it's the same company. So there are some released SAT tests. If you type in like free SAT practice exams, usually the College Board comes up first because of like trademark and stuff. So go with that. It's like SAT Suite, like SUITE. Go with that. And then there's going to be separate documents, one for the test, one for scoring, I think, and like an answer explanations one. I think you really just need the test itself and the answer explanations. But I would start there. So specifically for the reading AP Lang multiple choice, I would use SAT reading, not the first passage. The first passage is usually fiction, literary narrative. I would skip that one. I would do the other questions. You can, unless you're studying for the SAT as well, I would skip anything that says like something about like what's the best evidence for the previous question, because that's not on the AP Lang test. But the other questions are pretty good. Also on the AP Lang test, you're not going to get any questions about graphs and charts, which on the on the SAT reading, there are questions about that. So the only reason you would get a chart on the AP test is if it's on your synthesis. So you can also skip those questions if you want to. So you can use the College Board stuff. And then for writing and language SAT, which is like the writing AP Lang, I would only look at questions that have a question stem. So you on AP Lang, you don't need to know commas, semicolons, colons, dashes, like not the grammar questions, but the questions that have a question above it. Like it'll say something like, the writer wants to add the following sentence. Should they do so? And that's a way to use SAT questions to prepare for AP Lang if your teacher doesn't assign stuff on Classroom. The handwriting prompt was weird. Yeah, it was, because I feel like I get why they did that topic, but I wish they had, I don't know, like different sources or something. Let's see. Is there anything I can do to prepare for next year? So that's a good question. I would say the best thing you can do right now is keep up with your current English assignments in whatever class you're in, and just kind of start, I don't know, I don't think it's necessarily guaranteed to help you, but I would start listening to podcasts or TED Talks or reading nonfiction, just to kind of like increase your general knowledge, because that could help you eventually with some of the more abstract prompts possibly. But there isn't necessarily anything that I think you should be doing now if you're taking AP Lang next year. If you're also taking the SAT or ACT next year, then studying for that could, like I was saying before, could help you study for AP Lang. So that's actually what you probably could be doing. But it's not like AP Bio or AP World or APUSH, like it's a skills-based test. So it's really about focusing on becoming a stronger writer and learning how to argue well. It's not about memorizing content. So there's nothing that you can start memorizing right now that will help you, which hopefully is a good thing. So yeah, it's just focusing on becoming a stronger writer. So yeah, feel free to keep asking questions in the chat, anything about how to study for AP Lang or what the test is like, or questions about the test. Because I know there's usually questions about like sophistication and commentary, and I'm happy to answer those as well. Just while we're waiting for more questions to come in, just want to let people know that I go live each Sunday, not at this time typically, although if this time works for people, I might change it. Usually it's 3 p.m. Eastern. I was live earlier today. My live got interrupted because my preschooler is home and he is not feeling well, so I had to stop. But typically I go on weekly to answer questions as well. So if you're an AP Lang student, like feel free to follow. That way you don't miss out on content. I also do content over on YouTube, so I have lots of videos. This month marks my 4th year on YouTube, so I've got lots of videos and I've got more in store before the exam. So I'll be doing lives going into the exam as well. And I also offer like additional support for students who need it. So anyway, lots of ways for me to help you prepare for AP Lang if you're interested. So let's see. Any new questions on TikTok? Looks like I've answered all those so far. But yeah, if you have questions, feel free to ask. But while we're waiting for questions, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about commentary, because I think that's the thing right now that students need the most support with. If you are not familiar with the AP Lang rubrics, it's a 6-point rubric. So there's the thesis point, which is admittedly super easy. Then you get up to 4 points for evidence and commentary. And that's where your focus should be, especially at this point in the year. And then there's something called the sophistication point. And this point is pretty hard to earn. It's not that people don't earn it, but it's that it's difficult for a lot of students to earn it consistently. Some students never earn it, and that's okay. In APUSH, I think they call it like the unicorn point or something, and they're kind of similar. So we really need to be focusing on evidence and commentary at this point in the year. And I think the biggest thing that we need to know is that if you look at the rubric, there's 4 points for evidence and commentary. And if we're scoring a 1-2-0, we want to try to move that score to a 1-3-0. Because if you can get a 4 out of 6 or a 1-3-0 on each of your essays and get at least half of the multiple choice right, there's 45 questions. If you can get about 23 of them right, then you are on track for a 3, which at a lot of schools, not all of them, but a 3 composite, a lot of schools will give you credit for that, especially if it's like a smaller school or a public university, a local school. If you're shooting for like Harvard and Stanford, yeah, they're probably going to be wanting a 5 on the AP Lang exam. But if you're just trying to get potential college credit, that's really the threshold that you need. So focusing on that commentary is super helpful. Now, if you're wondering like how to get certain composite scores, it's going to be backwards because I wrote it on a Post-it note, but this is like a tentative breakdown. So you can see that you get 0 to 35 points. That's a 1 composite. 36 to 51 points is approximately a 2. 52 to 62 is a 3 composite. And then 63 to 72 is a 4. And then 73 to 100 is a 5. So if you're trying to figure out exactly how you can get a certain composite score, you need to figure out how many multiple choice you're getting right. So each one's 1 point. And then you take your essay scores and you take that and multiply either each individual score by 3.0556, or you can just like literally add up all 3 essay scores and then multiply it, and it should be fine. You add that to your multiple choice and you get a number, you round it, and then that's how you figure out your composite. So that's what my students have been doing or are about to do as they finish their mock, is we're trying to figure out their tentative composite going into like the last month or so of test prep. So anyway, if you were curious how to earn like a 4 or a 5, that's approximately how many points that you need. So we really want to be focusing on getting those higher essay scores, but also the multiple choice is usually a really good buffer. All right, so Feel free to ask any questions that you have about AP Lang in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer them if you want tips or tricks or, want to know how to do something like, if you have questions about the rubric, if you have questions about specific prompts, I can try to help, assuming that it's a prompt I'm familiar with. But yeah, just let me know in the chat what questions you have about AP Lang. And we've got some questions hopefully coming in on YouTube as well, because I'm trying to go live in both places. And I'll be going live weekly too. So if you don't have a question now, but like you think of one later, I'll be going live each Sunday, typically during the afternoon. So about 3 p.m. Eastern time. I've also got some classes and like different lives planned as the exam gets closer. So I'm going to be going live with Tim Friedis from the Garden of English. We're going to be going live to prepare for the exam, and we usually go live the night before the exam as well. So make sure that you're following or subscribed. That way you don't miss that, because those are usually like really fun sessions to answer tons of questions. So is a conclusion paragraph required for each essay? Okay, so that's a great question. And the short answer is no, and here's why. Number one, it's not on the rubric. So it does not say that it's required, therefore it's not required. Also, the essays are viewed as a rough draft. And so you're allowed to have spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes. You can even have like little blips of like inconsistencies in your content, and you can still score reasonably well. So you do not need a conclusion. In fact, if you are struggling for time, I would recommend just kind of ending your last body paragraph in a way that you feel is going to satisfactorily end your essay. And I would just skip the conclusion if you're running out of time. It's not necessary at all. That's not to say that people don't do them, but like, can you include a conclusion that would make your essay better? Yes. I've seen some people write a very in-depth conclusion and like if the rest of the essay was strong, it kind of elevated it to possible sophistication. But for the average student and the average essay, most of the times if we see a conclusion, it's really short. It's like one sentence, like their thesis all over again. And usually those are not necessary at all. So do not stress about that. I know some teachers require it though. Like some teachers like make you write one even though it's not required on the exam. Now, if you're trying to come up with a conclusion and you're like, okay, I want to write it better than just a thesis, I would recommend trying to situate the issue in a broader context. So one question that I have my students try to answer in conclusions for rhetorical analysis is, why is this message or argument relevant today? Because you can kind of go from like, this is how it was relevant in the past to here's how it matters today. So like, for instance, last year on the exam, there was a prompt about identity, and she was talking about identity in her passage. So you could talk about how that's relevant today. You don't want to do that in the body of your essay, but you could do it in the conclusion. Same for synthesis and argument. You could talk about how the issue is relevant today. So like short term, long term, like what are the deeper implications? Why do we really care about this issue? It's also possible that that could go in your body paragraphs as well. It's just additional commentary. I love your hair. Oh, thank you. It's like really messy right now. Also, the answer to your other question is no, but I'm not really sure why you're asking. So no. How is it possible to get the sophistication point? It's really hard to earn, but so I think the easiest way to get it, if I had to choose, would be situating the issue in a broader context, because I think that that's something that most students can at least attempt to do. So kind of like big picture stuff. For rhetorical analysis, you really want to connect to the rhetorical situation and examine like why they're making those choices for that audience on that occasion. I think that's probably like the big picture that we want to go for. If it's a historically relevant passage, then I would say possibly connecting to that as far as the rhetorical situation. Some people can earn it through style. I think that that's like probably the rarest one. I have had some students earn it for style this year recently, because we did a specific exercise where for argument, like I tried to have them put in personal experience and use vivid language and description. And some of my students were like, oh yeah, I really like this. It's kind of like a more creative approach. But I also had students that were like, this is really hard. This is not how my brain works. So if you are someone who likes creative writing, I would say maybe there's times when you could kind of experiment with word choice and sentence structure. But the vivid and descriptive style, I think, is like pretty hard for students. And then there's also a nuanced argument, and people, I think, misunderstand that one. I think a lot of people assume that they just have to put a counterclaim and rebuttal paragraph in their essay and then they have a nuanced argument, and that's not entirely true. But nuance is kind of like when you qualify it and you kind of examine like this is the position I've stated, but here's some other things to consider too. And here, a concession and refutation. A qualified argument can be nuanced. So instead of arguing like completely yes or completely no, just to kind of keep it simple, if you kind of set those parameters and you're like, okay, in these situations, it's this, and in these situations, it's that, that can be nuanced. But I think that's the one that people go for the most. I just think it kind of flops more often than it's successful. I struggle the most with evidence. It's hard to think of stuff on the spot. Any tips or examples? Okay, so I'm assuming you're talking about argument, because that's when you have to come up with your own evidence. So here's what I've done for my students that has sort of helped them. We like going into the exam, they make a list, and I'll do this in like a live, like closer to the exam. They make a list of like topics that they know really well, and they just kind of like write what they know. So about some historical figures, historical events, things like that. Because if you can kind of have like a short list of evidence to possibly draw from, that can help. So I have them kind of think about different abstract topics that they could use that evidence for. Last year's group said that that really helped them. So I intend to do that exercise with people closer to the exam, possibly in a YouTube video, possibly in a live, something like that. But just in general, I would say sometimes it really helps to brainstorm and kind of like brain dump all your options. So like all possible examples, and then kind of start to cross out ones that you think are like maybe not significant. And that way you're kind of narrowing it down, because sometimes our initial reaction to a prompt, like, oh, I want to write about this, sometimes that's not always like the best idea. Sometimes we need to kind of plan it out, and we really need to look at like, okay, how do these examples work together? Which one should go first? Which one should go second? Things like that. So that can be really helpful. Also, for specific evidence, we really want to prioritize things that you can talk about relatively knowledgeably. So you need like specific people or specific events. So one thing that we see kind of happen a lot is like people will choose evidence that's too broad. So for instance, they might choose like, I don't know, like the American Revolution. And usually that's too broad. But if you can narrow it down to like a specific person, like, I don't know, Paul Revere, or like a specific act, like the Townsend Acts, I think. I don't know, this is going way back to my history knowledge. Or something like the Boston Tea Party, like that's more specific. So American Revolution is too broad. But if we can narrow it down to something more specific than that, that's going to be better quality evidence. Also, what I see happen a lot of times is people choose like, I don't know, like there's certain figures that are popular. We see a lot of people writing about Columbus or Rosa Parks or Edison. I read a lot of essays with Edison as evidence. And so here's the thing is like, it is totally fine to write about those people if you actually remember them. But it seemed like a lot of people were kind of tapping into like their knowledge from like 4th grade and maybe not like their knowledge from like 11th grade history. So go with like the more specific knowledge that you have. And that kind of thing. But a little bit of planning before you start writing is really helpful. What's the difference between synthesis and argument? Okay, so basically synthesis has sources, so it's kind of like a mini research paper, and evidence does not. So a synthesis essay is an argument essay. It just has sources. They give you, it's been 6 most recently, but it can be anywhere from 6 to 8. So they give you the sources. You have to use evidence from at least 3 of them. And so you're still arguing, but you have the info to back it up, which is why it's a little bit easier, because you just have to pick your evidence from the sources. Whereas argument, you're given a prompt. Sometimes it's a quote, like usually it's some kind of quote and it's like, so-and-so said this, write an essay on this topic. But sometimes in recent years, it hasn't necessarily been a quote. It's just been like, here's the topic, but usually it's a quote. So that one I think is the hardest one. Would keeping up with current events help with the argument evidence? Yes, I believe so. Granted, we don't know the prompt. So I would say yes, because a lot of people try to write about current events, but they like write about it in a way that's like, you can tell that they just know, like, I don't know, like what they heard like one time on the news or something, like not, like they don't have the concrete specifics. So I would say yes. Like I have my students do something in the first semester where they choose like a podcast or a TED talk or a current events article or something. They have a list and they choose one a week. And I let them choose the topics that are of interest to them. And so hopefully that kind of builds their knowledge. And so I recommend that students kind of do the same thing, but start with stuff that's of interest to you. Like if you find, trying to think of like a current event, if you find earthquakes really interesting or like the oil spill that's going on in the US and like the train wrecks and stuff like that, if you find that interesting, dig deep into that. But if you're like researching it just because you feel like it could be a good topic, that might be a little bit more boring. So choose something that you're interested in. Like a couple years ago, I had a student write an essay for me about like something in pop culture at the time, but they were like so deep in the controversy, I guess, that like they had like all the details and it was super specific. So yes, current events can help. Do you need a conclusion paragraph in your essays? No, not for the exam. It's not required. It's not in the rubric. So it does not adversely affect your score if you don't have one, meaning like they can't take off points for it. So if you are running out of time, the first thing that you should not do is a conclusion paragraph. Now, your teacher might have different requirements in class, but that's different from the exam. All right, let me just double check and see if there's any more AP Lang questions. I appreciate y'all asking questions for sure. It's always nice to like answer questions from students who are trying to prepare for the exam. So feel free to ask questions if you have them. Also, I know I've said this if you've been on for a while, but I go live each Sunday, usually not at this time. Usually it's at 3 p.m. Eastern. So feel free to jump on either on YouTube or on TikTok. I'm like simultaneously broadcasting or going live right now. So I'm happy to answer those questions. Also, if you have questions like on TikTok, I can respond usually with a video and that kind of thing. So feel free to ask questions because chances are if you have the question, so does somebody else. How can you study for the MCQ? So if you don't have access to stuff on AP Classroom, which not everybody does, I feel like AP Classroom is like a good resource if your teacher will assign stuff. So that would be my first like thing to tell you. But if you don't have that, then I would say the best thing to do is to use either SAT tests. It used to be 10 total, but I think they took some offline. So there's about 6 of them. Like you can use SAT. Khan Academy has the exact same ones, I think. So SAT test, and you can use the nonfiction reading passages and like the writing and language questions that have a question stem. So like not the ones where you're trying to decide between like a comma, a colon, or a dash, but the ones where it's like, how should the writer reorganize this paragraph or something like that. So that's a good starting point. On the AP test, they're going to have 5 answer choices, not 4. So it's not perfectly the same, but it is roughly the same skills. So in that sense, it's good practice. And then the ACT has very similar questions too. I received a 4 on my mock. I got a 5 on the synthesis, 5 on rhetorical, and 6 on argument, but I got a 20 out of 45 on the MCQ. Okay, a 4 on your mock is still good. I would say, so your essay scores seem excellent. Here's what I would suggest for like the MCQ. You're going to want to figure out if your teacher gives you access to this info. You need to figure out, are there any trends? So first of all, look at your accuracy by passage. So sometimes there's a passage that's hard. Like there's one test on AP Classroom where the past 3 years, every year, my students like do noticeably worse on this one passage. I don't know why, it just is. So we take that for what it is. But like, so we look at, okay, what is your accuracy? Like you had 13 questions here. How many did you get right? We look at, okay, you had 12 questions here. How many did you get right? And we kind of go through that. So we look at accuracy, but we also look for trends. So are you better at the reading questions or the writing questions? Because for some of my students, they're kind of equal across the board. But I've had students who are really, really good at the writing questions and not so great at the reading questions. And so if we know that, then they go to that part of the test first. Because if you could, with whatever time you have, answer, let's say there's 20 questions, right? If you could answer 17 out of 20, then do that and start there because that's 17 points. You want to get at least like 23 out of 45. So play to your strengths. So that would be my first question is like, what's your overall accuracy for like reading and writing? Is there a strength? The second thing I would encourage you to do if you got a 20 out of 45 is to look for trends. So what I mean by that would be like, is there a trend in the type of question that you're missing? So for instance, if it's asking about, I'm trying to think of a good one. If it's asking about words in context, like what does this word in line, whatever mean? And you notice that like there's 4 of those questions and you get 3 of them wrong, then target that. Like, cause that's a question on the SAT and the ACT as well. So target that type of question. Should I focus on my essays more or my MCQ? Based on what you said your scores were, I would say your MCQ right now, because it sounds like your essays are good. If you got a 5 out of 6, a 5 out of 6, and a 6, there's not much more you can do there other than like 2 sophistication points. You should be putting your attention on multiple choice. For many other students, I think their attention should be on the FRQs. But based on the data you sent in the chat, I would say you should be focusing on multiple choice. Are the MCQ and essays in different sections? Yes. So that's a good question. So let me just kind of explain how the test works. So the first part of the test, after you get like all your basic info on test day, because they have like a whole prompt they have to read or like a script, you're going to take multiple choice. So what's going to happen is there's going to be like a multiple choice booklet and an answer sheet. It's probably already going to be on your desk. And then you have your FRQs and all that has to be like under your desk. And if you've never taken an AP test before, they literally like shrink wrap these things. Like there's like plastic wrap on them and there's stickers. Like when you're done, you have to like sticker it closed and stuff. It's a whole process. It's not that bad. They tell you what to do. I've had to proctor a couple AP tests and not AP Lang. I can't do an AP Lang one, but I did like AP Bio one year and AP World. And I just had to read the script and be like, okay, now put your sticker on. I was actually probably more nervous than the students were. So you do multiple choice first. You do that with pencil. I would bring like 2 number 2 pencils, not mechanical. I forgot why, because even though they're number 2 lead, but someone told me that like don't bring mechanical pencils. So anyway, number 2 pencils. You're going to bubble that in, seal it up when the hour is over, because you get 1 hour for 45 questions. Then you get a 10-minute break. Usually you can use the restroom and stuff. And then when you come back, you like your multiple choice is done. That's like under your chair or whatever, wherever you have to put it. The essays come out and you have like a booklet where there's your prompts and you have another booklet where you write. And there is, okay, the pages are double-sided. I want to say there's 12 pages. If you ever run out, which I've never had a student run out of paper, but if you do, there's like a way that they can add more. So all your essays and like scratch paper, that kind of, you can write in the essay, the booklet with the prompts, but like all your essays go in there in like one separate booklet. And that's how you do it. So you cannot be working on multiple choice when you're supposed to be working on FRQ. And when you're working on multiple choice, you cannot start your essays. So they're totally separate sections, totally separate booklets. Like they're never supposed to be on your desk at the same time. So anyway, that's how it works. It's very compartmentalized. Now, when you're doing your FRQs, which are your essays, you have 2 hours and 15 minutes to divide up as you please. They recommend 15 minutes for reading everything, especially synthesis, and then the next like 3 intervals of 40 are for your essays. Most of my students kind of break it up differently. So most of my students they all kind of start with synthesis because it's like the most involved, and they'll try to spend like 10 minutes reading and planning, and then 40 writing, and then they'll take that extra 5 minutes from the reading and they'll put it toward rhetorical analysis. And so basically you can move at your own pace, but the person proctoring your exam is supposed to tell you at certain points, like your recommended reading period is done. It's advised you move on to essay 1. And then 40 minutes later, they're supposed to tell you it's advised that you move on to essay 2. But you can technically divide up the time however much you want. You just can't, you can't work on multiple choice when you're supposed to be working on essays and vice versa. I'm taking the digital test, or will they allow scrap? Yes, they do allow scrap paper. I read that. I haven't looked into the requirements too much, but I read somewhere very recently that you get scratch paper. So I will find out more about the digital test, but yes, I heard that you do. How many months before do you think juniors should start studying for the SAT? That's a good question. So here's the thing. It kind of depends on your situation, because my students take the ACT, but I have some students who like they just take it for the first time and they don't study at all because they're like, I just kind of want to see what I know. If you are trying for like a certain score and you don't want to just kind of like wing it, or if you're paying for the test and you're like, I don't want to waste my money, I would say, because you're probably also studying for like math and stuff, I would say definitely start studying at least a month before, because you want to take like a practice test, either like a free one online or there's prep books out there. Kind of figure out like what you need to work on. And then like based on like what you're missing, that's what you should target your practice for. I wish I had done that when I took like the SAT and the ACT in high school. Like I wish I mean, I guess I did do that, but I feel like I just kind of kept taking practice tests and I would like look at what answers I got wrong. And then I would just kind of go from there. But like, I wish I had been a little bit more focused with like, oh, okay, this is what you missed. This is why you missed it. And then like go learn the skill. Cause I would just like read the explanation, but I wouldn't like go ask my teacher a question or something. So, like with my students now, because of that, I will like kind of go through with them like, okay, we've missed a few questions here on this skill. So now we're going to go back to the skill and we're going to talk about it in detail. That way, hopefully their scores come up. So you can be really targeted in a month. I know a lot of students spend more prep time than that, but I would say like a month is okay, especially if you're doing it kind of regularly. Let's see. What would be the best way to introduce evidence in an argument essay? So you kind of just like, okay, you're going to have your topic sentence, which is a claim. And then you can like some people will say like for example and stuff. You don't have to. You can just like kind of weave into it. It's really hard to explain without showing you an example. There are some sample prompts online though, and I do have some videos about it, but basically like you can kind of start talking about that example. Some people will say, for example, or whatever, but you kind of just like make your claim and then you just start talking about it. I wish there was a way for me to like on TikTok, like show you a sample essay, but I don't really quite know how to do that with just my phone. But definitely look at the sample essays online. So you can kind of like the high scoring ones, so you can kind of see how they introduce it. There's not like a magical formula. Like there's not like a right way and a wrong way. It's not like, especially because you're not quoting anything, it's not as hard as it sounds. Now, if we're talking rhetorical analysis and synthesis, there are ways to embed the quotes. You don't want to just drop it into your essay. So if you're talking about like synthesis, I do have a couple of videos on that about how to like cite your sources and embed evidence, because for those essays, you really want to integrate your quotes well. I'm nervous. I'm bad at rhetorical analysis. Rhetorical analysis is my favorite. I know it's not everybody's favorite, but rhetorical analysis, I have tons of YouTube videos on it, and it's like my favorite of the 3 essays. So if you ever have specific questions about rhetorical analysis, please ask, because I feel like when students kind of know what's expected of them, it makes rhetorical analysis easier. I think rhetorical analysis is hard at first because it's like literary analysis. Like if you've ever had to analyze like a novel or something, but like once people start talking about rhetorical choices and stuff, I know it gets kind of tricky. So I just think sometimes it's hard because it's new. Do you lose points if you have spelling mistakes? No. I actually wish they would change this about the rubric, because or not the rubric, the way they ask the questions, they have these like bullet points, and the last bullet point says something like basically like use correct grammar and punctuation, which is true. Like it's nice if you can, but like literally no. As long as we can read your essay, it doesn't matter if you forget a comma. It doesn't matter if you spell a word wrong. Quite frankly, like we're human too. So I feel like as much as like teachers are like, oh, you should know how to spell and you should know how to use correct grammar, like you're human. It's a timed essay and you're writing under duress. So no. Handwriting is important though. It is super hard sometimes to read certain people's handwriting. So I care much more about, can I read your words rather than can you spell your words correctly? And I say that because I had a student several years ago who probably had like some kind of undiagnosed dyslexia or something, because this person spelt almost every single word wrong, it seemed like at times, but I could tell what word they meant. And so I could read the essay just fine. That person scored, I think, a 4 composite on their exam. This was like before the rubric change, but still, like there was like I guarantee you they had a ton of spelling mistakes in their essays, but you could read the essay. So it was fine. It's actually kind of unfair to penalize people for spelling mistakes sometimes. Just my opinion, though. Others can disagree. I have AP laying homework now. I want to cry. It's a reader response. Yeah, those are not always super fun. Is Khan Academy a good studies tool for the SAT? I believe so, yes. I've had some students use it. I don't use it a ton with my students, mostly because we take the ACT, but like Khan Academy is good, yes. Some of their videos, I do think they're helpful, but I think what's really helpful is you can take I believe you can take like a full SAT practice test on there for free too. I've had, I think, a couple tutoring students of mine do that. So overall, I do recommend Khan Academy. They work really hard to put out quality content. For rhetorical choice, would it be okay to just do logos, ethos, pathos? No, I wouldn't recommend it. Here's why. Those are rhetorical appeals, not rhetorical choices. So if you want more info about this, search for like something like Coach Hall writes how to write about rhetorical appeals. And I have a video and a blog post that should come up. And in those like videos and blog posts, it talks about how choices create appeals. So instead of focusing on like logos, what is making the logical appeal? Is it that they're giving statistics or facts or examples? If so, that's your choice. Write about that. If you notice pathos, which emotion? And how do you know they're creating that emotion? Is it because of their word choice? Usually it's word choice. And like the tone, is it the details? I guess you could use examples in some cases to make an emotional appeal. So you got to figure out like, what are they doing that's like, how did you know? So if you knew it was an emotional appeal, how did you know? And then same for like ethos, credibility. It could be like the use of a personal anecdote. It could be a lot of like first person pronouns, that kind of thing. So it's not that you can like, I'm not saying don't write about them, but there's usually a better way. And it usually does not end well if you write about all three. Because like it feels very forced and it feels like you almost didn't understand what rhetorical analysis is. So if you've done that in the past, that's not to like scare you, but there is a better way. And I have several YouTube videos about that. But if you're looking for like the first one to start with for that, search for Coach Hall writes how to write about rhetorical appeals. And I think that'll clarify things. And also if you're going to write about logos, ethos, or pathos, or pathos. Someone told me once it's pathos. I'm sorry. But if you're going to write about that, don't use those words. Use the English. So say logic, and then instead of emotion, you can say emotion, but like really it's better to say which emotion. Because if I just said to you, the writer appeals to emotion, I've told you nothing. Not really. Because they could be appealing to fear. They could be appealing to patriotism. They could be appealing to nostalgia. So unless I tell you what the emotion is, I'm not helping you understand the text. How do you explain or analyze logos? Okay, so again, like look for what's making it logical. So like is it examples? Is it statistics, facts? Is it conditional sentences? That's kind of rare. But if they say like if this, then this, that's logical. So we want to figure out like what is logical about it. And then that's your choice. And instead of saying the writer uses logos, you could say something like the writer logically claims that, or the writer logically asserts that, and tell us what they're saying. Or you could say like, by like, trying to think of how to do it, like by including, this particular fact, and you can tell us what it is. The writer creates a logical appeal. Like you can still talk about logos, but call it a logical appeal, but talk about why they're doing it and how they're doing it. So instead of just saying, oh, they're using logos, tell us how that is happening and why. And that's going to be a much better essay. Okay, I see a question about commentary. So hold on. Let's see. How do I incorporate the rhetorical situation into my commentary? Great question. Okay, so I have a video about this, and I'm actually working on a new video that has sentence frames that help with this too. So the rhetorical situation, in case you're just tuning in or you're not familiar with it, is so I use the acronym SPACE: speaker, purpose, audience, context, exigence. Some teachers use SOAP, like soapstone. So speaker, occasion, audience, purpose. Same thing, just different acronyms. So the occasion is the context and exigence. So we want to think about, why did this speaker make this choice for this audience on this occasion? Okay. So let me use one of the ones that I've used in my video essays is FDR. So we'll use that. So FDR gave a speech after Pearl Harbor was attacked. Okay. So he was president. We know that he was president. So we need to think about like what he's going to be doing as president in his speech. Well, it's his job to inform the public because they didn't know what had happened. He was like broadcasting this over the radio. They had no clue. So in his role as president, he has the job of informing people, but he also has to create an enemy because he wants the US Congress to declare war. So he knows that they're not just going to declare war because historically the US was isolationist. So he has to convince Congress, who is part of his audience, that this is the answer. So by using certain words and like listing things to create a common enemy, they're going to be more receptive to his call to action at the end, which is when he says, let's go to war. So we know that as president, he's going to be trying to inform and reassure, but also he has to get them on board with war. And they're going to trust in him because he's president. So that's how you can kind of think about the speaker. Now, he's going to value justice and he's going to value freedom. His audience, Congress, they're also going to value justice and freedom. So because they have similar values, we can incorporate that into our analysis. So we could say something like, knowing that Congress also values freedom, he, like FDR, does this and this and this. Like he emphasizes how malicious the attack was, because then they're going to want to to have revenge, or they're going to want justice. So knowing that they value freedom, he emphasizes the malicious nature of the attack. So just by kind of incorporating these little bits of the rhetorical situation, it helps your analysis. You can bring up the historical context if you know it. You can bring up definitely the message, argument, or purpose. But yeah, those are some ways to incorporate commentary. Now, the prompt is going to ask about message, argument, or purpose. All passages have a purpose. So when in doubt, there should be a purpose for you to be analyzing. If it asks about the message is going to be like a lesson or some kind of like takeaway. An argument is meant to be persuasive. So there's typically not a message and an argument. It's usually one or the other. So we want to connect to the message by talking about like how the choice they're making is helping convey their message. So for instance, like if they're using certain words, how is that helping their message? If they're making a particular comparison, how is that helping their message? So just keep kind of asking and answering the question of like, how is this helping them achieve their message? Because sometimes students are pretty explicit with it, but like they literally say like, this helps the writer achieve their message because, and even though that might not be the most sophisticated sentence, it's still commentary. If you're struggling with commentary, the word because is super helpful because commentary is the why. So we want to make sure that we're addressing why or how. So use the word because. You can also use verbs like highlights, illustrates, suggests, emphasizes. Those help as well. Sorry, that's kind of like a very like in-depth answer to that question. But it is very important to incorporate the rhetorical situation. I feel like a lot of people don't do it, and that's why their scores are a little bit lower. So definitely something to consider as far as like helping your commentary. But I do have a video coming out. I was supposed to try to finish it today, but I think since I have tomorrow off, it'll be out tomorrow. But it's just some of my favorite sentence frames. And I do have some in that video that are about the rhetorical situation. And they've been in other videos as well, but I'm trying to put them all in one place for everybody. So that way you can use those frames to get you started trying to incorporate the rhetorical situation. All right, awesome. Any other questions? Feel free to ask any questions you have about AP Lang, and I'd be happy to answer them for a little bit. We've had some good questions so far talking about commentary. Had a couple people asking about conclusions. No, they're not necessary. Had a couple questions about like body paragraphs. You can have 2. You don't need 3, just FYI. Had a few questions about like the setup of the exam and like how to get a certain score. So yeah, if you're just tuning in, feel free to ask whatever questions you have. Do I have to repeat the message or purpose in each body? I would. And here's why. So like the way the rubric is, it says that you have to basically to get a 3. This is kind of simplifying it a little bit, but you have to have one paragraph that thoroughly connects the choice to the message, argument, or purpose. And like you don't want your reader to infer that you've done it. You want it to be very clear. So if I'm scoring an essay and I don't see that the person has connected it to the message or purpose, then I'm automatically like, ooh, this is probably going to be a 2. Or maybe if they do it in the next paragraph, it can bump up to a 3. So I would do it in each paragraph because then if you do it well and it's consistent, then you could be eligible for a 4 in evidence and commentary. But if not, if it's like, even if it's like so, like let's say you do it really well in one paragraph and it's not so great in the other, then you still at least hopefully will get that 3 in row B. So definitely make sure you are, because remember, that's part of the prompt. Like they're asking you about the like the rhetorical choices and how that helps them with the message, argument, or purpose. So if you don't put it in each body paragraph, it's going to feel like you're not actually answering the prompt. So yeah, also as far as purpose and message, also argument, explicitly say what it is. So don't just say this helps the writer achieve their message, because if you don't tell us what the message is, then it's not really an analysis. So then the question becomes, well, if I have to say that in my thesis and each body paragraph, maybe I'm saying it 4 or 5 times in my essay, then isn't that redundant? Try to use different words, like try to use synonyms. So for instance, trying to think, like last year's prompt was it like her, it was her message of identity. So you could say at one point conveys her message of identity, but that doesn't really tell us what her message is. So if her message is that one should embrace their identity, then say that helps her convey her message that one should embrace their identity. So that way you've said it differently, because if you just say message of identity, that doesn't really tell us anything. So be as specific as possible. But yes, you're going to need to repeat it in each body paragraph. Also, for what it's worth, for synthesis and argument, you want to make sure you're using the words in the prompt if you can. So like I've seen it happen a few times, but like let's say the prompt was like the one from a few years ago, write about something that's overrated. I've seen people write a whole essay where they didn't actually use the word overrated. We want to see that word or a synonym. So use the words from the prompt, like not always word for word, but make sure that you are using those words, because that's also going to help you make sure that you're answering the prompt correctly. And that will really help in ones like, I think I said this on the live earlier, but there was a prompt a couple years ago about the value of striving for perfection. And a lot of people, not a lot, but some people turned it into the value of perfection. So if you use the wording from the prompt, it's going to help you stay on topic. So yeah, just always double check that you understand what you're being asked to write about. Same with like last year's synthesis. It was kind of like, what is the value of STEM initiatives? And like a lot of people kind of wrote about the value of STEM. And in most cases, I think it worked out. But like if you looked at the question, it was the value of STEM initiatives. So use the language of the prompt. Is it best to have a counter argument as the first body paragraph or the last? Good question. If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have been like, oh, the first, because that's how I would have done it. The more I've taught it, the more I think it should probably be last. And the reason why I say that is because most students who address the counter argument, they have 2 body paragraphs, and like then their third is their counter argument. So worst case scenario, if you mismanage your time for whatever reason, then you have 2 body paragraphs and then you don't get to your counter argument, you can still score well. You don't have to have a counterclaim and rebuttal or concession and refutation. So it's better to prove your points first, perhaps. That way, if you run out of time, you can cut the addressing the counter argument. So that's why I would say that it's probably good to put it at the end. All right, we've got a question over on YouTube. Let's see. So it says, what is the minimum a student should score on each essay and multiple choice to get a 4 out of 5 overall? Okay, so you're going to want to probably score on multiple choice at least 30, and ideally 4s and 5s on your essays. And here's why. Let me write it down and I can try to show y'all. Okay, so how you calculate your score, in case you've never like been told this, is each essay is gonna be multiplied by 3.0556. Okay, so let's say we get like a 4 on one and a 5 on the other and a 4 on the other. We're gonna multiply that by 3.0556. And we're going to get a number. And then our multiple choice, if you get 30 right, that's 30 points right there. So you're going to take, let's say you got, and it's probably backwards for y'all, but let's say you get 30 points for multiple choice, and you're going to do all this math here. You're going to add these 2 together, and it's going to give you a number, and you're going to round. Then you can figure out here how many points that is. So if you're trying to get a 4, that's going to be, you need 63 points to 72 points. Approximately. If you're trying to go for a 5, you need 73 to 100. So you can kind of plug in the numbers there and figure out, okay, like if I want to earn a 4, this is approximately how many multiple choice I need, and this is approximately what I need on my essays. There, if you don't want to do all this math, there are a couple places. I think Albert.io is one, and maybe Marco Learning. There's a couple places that have an online score calculator. They're usually pretty accurate. So you can kind of type in the numbers and kind of play around with it and figure out what your composite would be. But that's how I have my students do their mock exam, is I have them take like how many multiple choice they got right. And then I have them take their essay scores. They multiply their essay scores. We add everything all up, and then they're left with a number. And then we figure out, okay, what's their composite based on this? So that would be how I would try to figure out how to get a 4. And you can, of course, play around with it too. Like if you know you're stronger with essays, then play around with like best and worst case scenarios. I usually have my students do that. Like, what is the highest essay score you've received? And then what's the lowest? And then we kind of play with that so that they can kind of see like, oh, on my best day, maybe I'm going to get a 4 composite, but on my worst day, maybe it's a 3 composite. And then we can kind of figure out, okay, what can we do to kind of counteract this? So yeah, you can kind of start to predict your score. Just know though that, because I do give my students a mock exam, and I think mock exams can be really helpful. But just know that it's not like a guaranteed thing. So I have had some students in the past get like a 2 on their mock, and they made like a 3 or a 4 on their real thing. I've also had students make a 5 on their mock, and then they come out with a 3 on the real thing. So nothing can totally mimic the real test. So just kind of keep that in mind too. Like you want to have it hopefully boost your confidence a little bit, but you don't want to be too confident, but you also don't want it to like make you feel like really crummy either. All right, awesome. Thank you for that question though. That was great. Is there anything else I can answer tonight? If people have any more questions, feel free to leave it in the chat and let me know. And if not, then I will come on again next week. But yeah, if you're just tuning in, I usually go live earlier in the day on Sundays, 3 p.m. Eastern. I try to go live on TikTok and YouTube at the same time. So if I'm like ever looking in the wrong direction, that's probably why. And I'm going to be doing some lives coming up, not just weekly, but also like lives to prepare for the exam. So please make sure you're subscribed and following. That way you don't miss that information. And also if you're on TikTok, like feel free to ask questions as a comment on videos, because I can always like reply to that either with a regular comment or a video comment, and help answer questions there as well. It's a little bit harder I can reply on YouTube, but it's not the same way. You said the video about sentence frames will be released tomorrow. Yes, that's my goal. I'm editing it tonight and I'm almost done with it. So it should be released tomorrow. It's going to be about rhetorical analysis sentence frames. And then I'm going to do a separate one for synthesis and argument. The reason why is because I felt like it would be too much in one video if I put it all in one. But basically it's a video where you'll see the sentence frames on the screen and I kind of talk you through like how to use it. I don't necessarily have like examples of it because I do examples in other videos, but you can basically like look at the sentence frames and screenshot it if you want to, that kind of thing. But it just kind of tells you like, okay, this is why you would use this sentence frame and here's how to do it. But sentence frames have really helped my students a lot, especially my students who tend to struggle with like articulating their ideas. The sentence frames are super helpful for getting them started. So that video is coming out soon. Like definitely tomorrow. I'm not sure what time yet because it depends on how long it takes me to finish editing. Any advice to make my commentary less of a summary? For which essay? Because I feel like it can happen with any of the essays, but is it happening with one in particular? I think the thing about like commentary is that we want to make sure that like, yes, it's kind of natural to summarize the evidence, and that usually results in like possibly a 1-2-0. So we want to ask ourselves, why is this important? So if it's for synthesis or argument, like if you're quoting a statistic or a fact or some kind of like example, like why is this important? And like, what is it showing us? So instead of using the word shows, you could use emphasizes, illustrates, highlights, things like that. But we really want to talk about like why it matters. So just keep asking yourself like, so what or why? I did this exercise with my sophomores, and I think they temporarily thought I was crazy because I was asking them, like, they had to choose their evidence. And I think we were doing the locavore synthesis at the time. So somebody had like they wanted to use the quote. It was something like, the supermarket is only a mile away. And so I was like, okay, why does that matter? And they're like, well, it's convenient. And I was like, okay, why does that matter? And they're like, because people aren't going to go to the farmer's market. And I was like, okay, why does that matter? And so and they were kind of like, what is she doing? But what they realized after we kind of went through the whole exercise is that if you keep asking yourself, why does that matter? And you keep doing like, because this, then it's going to help your commentary. And I noticed that when they wrote those essays, it was a little bit like formulaic at times, but you could tell they were really thinking through like, okay, this is what I've said and here's why it matters. And then they weren't really summarizing the evidence. They were actually like commenting on it, which made it super helpful. So yeah. And then for rhetorical analysis, instead of summarizing it, to try to avoid that, keep asking yourself, like, why did they make this choice? Also look at the evidence that you're using. So like really dig into the word choice. So even if you're talking about repetition, great. Why are they repeating that word? So don't just tell us like, yeah, they repeat it for emphasis. Okay, that's true. But why that word? What tone does that word have? What kind of like weight, if you will, does that word have? Like if somebody's repeating the word freedom, then there's a reason why they're repeating that word. And it's probably going to relate to their message. If they're repeating the word attack, that has a highly negative connotation. So why that word? So just keep asking yourself why. Hopefully that helps. I got a 21 out of 45 on my first MCQ. How do I get better? Okay, great question. So first of all, 21 out of 45, I know it sounds bad because we're used to like, if you're, an A, B student, you're probably expecting like a 37 out of 45. And even then that might be low. Here's what you need to know about AP Lang multiple choice. You're not expected to make 100. So let's get that out of the way right now. But a 23 out of 45 is on track for a 3 composite. So in that regard, a 21 out of 45 is not bad. Not at all. Now, if you're like, but Coach Hall, I don't want a 3 composite. I want like a 4 or a 5. Okay, we've got a little bit of work to do. So here's what I would do if I were you. It sounds like you took a full test because you have a score out of 45. So let's try to figure out what you did well and what you could work on. Look at your reading passages and your writing passages and tally up your sub score. So if there were 23 questions for reading and 22 for writing, how many reading questions did you get right? And how many writing questions did you get right? Is it kind of equal across the board, or were you better at one than the other? Also, try to figure out, did you have enough time? Because if your accuracy was really good for the writing, but you only got through half of them and then you had to guess, well, that tells us that, hey, you're really accurate with this, but your pacing's off. So we want to figure out like, what are your strengths? Are your strengths reading? Is it writing? Are you equally the same at both? And that would be one thing, because I do have some students each year who are stronger at the writing. And so to the point where like they start with those questions because reading's not their thing. Not that they do badly, but like if they're trying to maximize their score and be strategic, they start with the writing. I have other students who they just start with question 1 and work their way through. So that would be the first thing, is which one are you better at if you're better at one? The next thing would be, are there trends? So look at the questions that you're getting right. What do they have in common? Like, are you really good at the ones about vocab? Because if so, then on exam day, hey, I'm good at this type of question. Let me do my thing. If you are struggling with, let's say it's a vocab question, let's say that's your weakness, and you're like, oh, there were 4 of them, I got 3 of them wrong. That's what you need to start studying. And you can use SAT tests and ACT tests to do so. So what I try to do with my students is figure out what their strengths are, so we know what they need to try to cater to when they're trying to go for points. And then we also look at their weaknesses, because that's what we need to be studying in the meantime to try to make that less of a deficit. So that's what I would do. But a 21 out of 45 is not bad. We want to try to get you higher than that, but like, you didn't bomb it. It might feel like you did, but it's really not as bad as you might think. So next time you take a full test, if you have one soon, aim for like 25 to 27. So any other questions? What is the requirement for a composite score of a 4 or a 5? Okay, so what are you normally getting on your essays? because that would help me kind of answer that question. But basically, so each multiple choice is 1 point, and then your essays get multiplied by 3.556. So if you're trying to get a 4 or a 5, you're trying to get between, it's probably backwards for you. If so, I'm sorry, 63 to 72 points. And if you're trying to get a 5, it's 73 to 100 points. So each multiple choice is 1 point, and then your essays get multiplied by 3.0556. And if you don't want to do all that math, there are online score calculators that are pretty accurate. So you can just kind of like, it'll tell you like whatever number out of 45, and you can click that. And then you can put in your essays and it calculates it for you. And then you could kind of change it. So you could be like, okay, if I get 2 more questions right, does that change my composite score? What if the audience isn't clearly stated? Okay, good question. Because like sometimes it's not, especially for things like the worst one I think is like when they give you an excerpt from a book, because it's like you have to kind of ask yourself, okay, who would be reading this? Which like there's usually an answer, but it's not as obvious as like a letter or a speech. So that would be where I would start. First of all, the audience is not everyone. So it could be a large audience, though. It could be like the American public. But try to think about like, okay, who would be reading this? Who are they targeting? And the way you figure that out is number 1, think about the topic. Because that might give you insight into who they're targeting. Also, look at where it was published, if that information is present. So that might not always be there, but if it's like an article and it's published in like, the New York Times, like certain demographics of people are going to be more likely to read that than others. Like if it's published in the New York Times, you as a high school student are not their target audience. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. But I think usually like with the topic, you can figure out, you're better able to figure out like who it's geared toward. But it could be like, is it parents? Is it teachers? Is it like a certain generation? My students read one, like an article that was actually used on the SAT before they took the essay off. And so there was like a little line in it at one point, and it said something like, those of us over the age of 35. And so we did the math of when it was published and like worked backwards. And like the guy was like a boomer. So my students were like, can we say boomers? Like, can the audience be boomers? And I was like, yes. Because at first they were like, oh, it's like old people. And I was like, pardon? And they're like, people over 35, old people. And I was like, y'all, I'm pushing 33. Like, that's not old. So we had a good laugh at that. But there's usually some kind of clue in it as to who the audience is. So it could be a whole generation. It could be like a subgroup of people. So yeah, but if it's not clearly stated, try to think about who is going to be reading that publication or about that topic. But there's usually a clue in the passage somewhere as to who their audience is. My teacher grades them out of 20. So I tend to get a 15 to 17. Oh, okay. So that's a little bit harder for me to answer then because I'm used to the 6-point rubric. So 15 to 17 out of 20 doesn't seem bad, but I'm not really sure how your teacher converts it. It would be good for you to know what you would get if it was out of 6, though. Like if they are able to, it would be a 3 or a 4 out of 6. Okay. We want at least a 4 out of 6. So that's good. So if you're currently getting, let's say you're currently getting a 4 out of 6, right? On each of your 3 essays, and then you got a 21. There's a potential that you could get a 3, but you're going to be hitting the low end of that 3 composite right now. So what I would be doing is I would be like, keep working on your essays and trying to get the 4 out of 6 consistently. Choose one of the 3 that you think you can get a 5 out of 6 on. Possibly just keep working on your writing like in class. Now, like because you're on the low end of that 3 composite, but it's a small range. Okay, again, it's probably backwards. I'm sorry, but 52 to 62. So let's say you're right here at this 52. Okay. But if you can get one more essay up by a whole point, that's at least 3 more points that you're going to get. And let's say you can answer 7 more multiple choice questions. Well, then you're already at the higher end here, maybe here. So it is possible to go like from like a 3 composite to a 4 composite for sure. But given the scores that you said, I would recommend just really honing in on your writing to keep that 4 out of 6 consistent. Maybe try to get one of the essays to a 5 out of 6. But I would focus your attention right now, because we're a few months away from the test, I would focus on the multiple choice. Because I think if you can figure out, like we were talking about before, like, is there a deficit? Like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Focus on that deficit, target that deficit. So if you know that, like, hey, I ran out of time, like I didn't even answer the last 10 questions because I was spending too long on reading. Okay, like let's figure out a solution to that. And that way you can get those points because that's a doable jump. Like 10 points is doable. Absolutely. What's a good hook for a research paper? That's a tough one because it depends on your topic. Don't do rhetorical questions because I think those are usually really cheesy. But I don't know because I most of my students don't really like. I used to teach hooks, like I used to like tell students to have one, and then my students would be like, "These are really hard to come up with." And then the more I started like teaching, like thinking about like the AP Lang test, I was like, "Oh, they don't actually need a hook." So don't do a rhetorical question. But also don't do like this happens on the AP test a lot too. Like don't do since the dawn of time. Like so many people start their essay like that. Please don't do that. The topic is global issues. That's a very broad topic. Is it possible for you to give specific ice advice based on our essays? Yes, I can. If you're looking for like specific, like, hey, I want to show you my essay, I do that through tutoring. Because I have so many people that want help that I'm not able to help everybody. However, if you go to like my profile, and there are links for OutSchool and it says students in all caps and it says OutSchool. I do different sessions there. And so if you want more information about that, please reach out. But I do offer like one-on-one tutoring, like one time, like, hey, we can meet for 20 minutes. Or 40 minutes or like things like that. So I do help students with their specific essays and like needs and stuff. And I'm also going to be offering some classes on OutSchool as the exam gets closer, but I'm not able to like actually comment on individual students' papers like outside of that, just because I have my own students' papers that I probably should be grading as well. But I'm happy to help through tutoring, and my tutoring is actually like comparatively very cost effective and things like that. So if you want help in that regard, please reach out. The best way is probably through Instagram, which I'm Coach All Writes there as well. What is a good technique to answer the multiple choice questions faster? I wish I had like a concrete method for this. Some of my students have said that if they read the passage first for reading, it helps them be more efficient. And I wish I had done this when I was in high school because I think it, like, for the way I work, I think it would help. Some of my students have been like, Coach Hall, I can't do it that way. I have to read the passage and then look at the questions. But for my students who struggle with pacing or struggle with like attention, like just kind of focusing in, if they look at the questions, not the answer choices, but if you're like, okay, it says like, okay, what is the function of paragraph 1? Well, okay, I've got a question about paragraph 1. So, like what to look for. Or if it's like, what is so-and-so's attitude toward this topic? Well, now you know when you're reading to look for so-and-so's attitude toward that topic. So that could be a way for you to do it faster. I would practice that with like an SAT or ACT test. I wouldn't just do that on test day. But some of my students really think that helps. But again, it's mixed. For just as many that say it helps, I have just as many say it doesn't help. The other thing is don't overthink questions. And I know that's easier said than done, but remember that literally no matter how hard or easy the question is, they're all worth 1 point. So stop spending like 5 minutes on one question because you literally could be getting 5 more points from other questions that are easier. Also, if a passage is super hard, it does not mean that the questions are going to be hard. I can't prove this 100%, but like some of my students have told me when we've been doing practice that like if the passage is hard, sometimes the questions are easy. And if the passage is easy, the questions are hard. Now, again, are there exceptions? Yeah. But don't just like give up on it, but don't like spend a ton of time on it because you want to answer every question. Even if it's just a guess, you really want to make sure you're answering every question. Also, process of elimination can be really helpful. So if you know that an answer choice is wrong, you can literally cross it out. All it takes sometimes is one single word to make an answer choice wrong. So if it's wrong, like it's wrong. Don't think about it anymore. Let's see. I can't. Someone commented something and I was going to answer it. Now I can't find that. It's pretty similar to SAT and ACT reading. Yes, it is. We've been using the Tim Freitas approach. Yeah, Tim is a good friend of mine. We actually are going to be doing some lives together coming up. We've done like last year and the year before we did some. So we're going to be teaming up this year as well. He and I have similar approaches, but they're not entirely the same. Our thesis statement approach is really very, very similar. And our commentary approach is like a little bit different. And I think there's value in both. But he has some great videos. Tim is from the Garden of English. His videos are way fancier than mine because his wife is basically like a professional video editor, essentially. I am not. So they spend hours on their videos and making them super fancy. But yeah, Tim's a great guy. Tips on time management. So for the essays, okay, here's the big thing is it can actually really help you to prepare in advance. So like, don't just start writing, come up with a plan. Even if the plan takes you 5 minutes to come up with, usually you're going to do better if you have a plan, because otherwise you could get writer's block as you're going. So have a plan, because then you're going to be able to write more quickly. So it kind of balances out. Keep your intro short. So if we're talking about essay time management, you do not need a long intro. So those people who write like a whole half-page intro, it's not actually helping you the way you probably think it is. So an intro can be really short, like 3 sentences. Worst case scenario, just a thesis. But usually I recommend like a couple sentences before that, because if you just have a thesis, it tends to feel really abrupt. So lead into it, but your intro should be really short. 2 body paragraphs, possibly 3. I know a lot of teachers require 3 in class, but for the exam, 2 body paragraphs is fine. I would much rather see an essay with like 2 developed body paragraphs, like very good body paragraphs, than 3 just kind of simplistic, mediocre ones. And then another thing about time management is that you do not need a conclusion paragraph. So if we're talking like essay time management, those are kind of like the biggest tips. Also, don't worry so much about like crossing stuff out and rewriting it. On the exam, first of all, if you need to cross something out, just strike through it. Don't like redact it like it's some CIA document. You don't need to scribble, because that's super annoying too. Like when people are like scribbling stuff out and you can hear their pen on the desk and like other people are trying to take the test, like don't do that. Just cross it out. They won't read it. But I've seen kids rewrite like an entire paragraph and I'm like, oh, what are you doing? Cause like could you have saved it without having to start over? So don't worry so much about like, oh, this one sentence isn't good or things like that. Like literally, we're looking like holistically at your content. So it's okay if you worded it weird, just like draw an arrow or cross out like one word, but you don't have to start over. I've seen a lot of people just randomly start over, and I always get super nervous for them because of their pacing. I'm not sure if you saw my question, but is it possible for me to get a 5 considering the time left? Anything's possible. And I say that because I've seen my own students jump like from a 3 to a 5 and things like that. So it really just depends, without knowing like what your writing style is like and what you're kind of doing in class. Like anything is possible. And I say that because I had a student a few years ago who made a 4. When she first started in class, I had her as a sophomore. She was in my on-level English class. And I was like, you're capable of more, go to honors. So at semester she switched. And I didn't know this at the time, but people were telling her like, you're stupid, you shouldn't do this. And I didn't know, or otherwise I would have put a stop to it. So then I told her you should take AP Lang. And the whole time she apparently was thinking like, oh, I can't do it. And I was like, no, you can. She ended up getting a 4. And I almost cried, like literally almost cried, because she said to me after, like, it was when she was graduating, but like, when I saw her score, I felt that one. She said, you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Like literally everyone was telling me I'm stupid and I shouldn't be in the class. And you saw something in me I didn't see in myself. So I will never tell a student that a certain score is not possible. But I don't guarantee scores. But she just kind of like listened, and she was really strategic about it. And she brought her very low 2 composite up to a 4 composite by exam. So on her exam, she got a 4. And so I feel like big jumps are possible. So take that as you will. But yeah, there are so many factors involved. But yeah, she was just like an awesome all around kid, just really hard worker. Do you think we'll be able to delete writing on the virtual? Yeah, you should be able to. I think because like at least with like the previous digital tests that they've done, like, yeah, it worked kind of like a Word document sort of. So yeah, I think you can. My students are not taking the digital test, so I don't know as much about it. When they asked us at our school what we wanted, everybody all across the board, all tests were like paper. But the digital test should be absolutely fine. But you should be able to like edit, and shouldn't be a big deal. All right. Any more questions? If you're finding this helpful, please, if you're on TikTok, tap your screen a couple times, give this some likes because that kind of helps boost it for the next time I go live. And yeah, feel free to ask a few more questions. Hopefully it's getting late here. It's like 10, almost 10:30 here. So hopefully y'all are not staying up super late on a school night. Hopefully you have the day off tomorrow like we do. Are you doing AP reading this year? I am. I was invited to Tampa. I was in Tampa last year. And we don't really actually get to do a ton of fun things in Tampa. But I really liked the AP reading. I don't like sitting still for that long, I'm not gonna lie. But the AP reading was fun. And so I will be in Tampa this year. But it feels so far away. Like it feels so weird to even think about the AP reading. But just in case like students are curious, your AP readers are most of us are high school English teachers. There are some who are college professors. And we're just like everyday people. But we come from all different walks of life. So keep that in mind when you're writing, that your teacher is probably very similar to an AP reader. But I tell my students, like, you're writing, you don't know who's reading your paper. So like keep that in mind. But you do know that they're an educator. Like you do know that they teach AP Lang or some kind of equivalent class. So yeah. When do the scores come out? It's July, approximately July 5th to 7th. There is a schedule. If you Google it, it will be available like online somewhere. In fact, let me see if I can Google it. When do AP Lang scores come out? Because I thought teachers usually got them like a day before students, but I don't know if that's actually true. Sorry, I gotta like move my phone so I can see it. Okay, it should be out. AP score release, but I know it's early in July. That's all it says. AP scores are available in July, but there's usually a calendar already. Sorry, I thought that it was already out, but like it's around I think it's around July 7th, approximately. And it's kind of annoying because it goes by state. So like depending on where you live, you get your info sooner. So yeah, there will be a schedule that they'll release it. So it's scored in June, but the scores are released in July. What score should I be aiming for getting a 4 on the essays and high scoring on the... Okay, so if you're getting a 4 on your essays and high scoring on your MCQ, then you should definitely be a 3 composite. Hopefully you're closer to a 4 composite. It depends on what you mean by high scoring. But yeah, if you're 4s on your essays and high on multiple choice, it should probably be a 4 composite. But again, like there's a range of this, so it could be higher, it could be lower. Let's see. I don't know why, but I always have the mindset that my writing has to be so advanced to be good. It actually doesn't. So here's the thing. So I have read some essays where I'm sure there are people who would like be like, oh, someone wrote about that. But like I read a 4 out of 6 essay about Moana. It was at our state mock exam. It was about how Moana is overrated. I was convinced. I read another one that same year at our state mock exam about how this basketball player, Russell Westbrook, is overrated. I had never heard of him because I don't follow professional basketball, but this student had me convinced. I was like, dang, this guy's overrated. Like, I don't even know him, but like, I mean, and that one I think got like I think I gave it like a 131 because it was weirdly sophisticated. But you wouldn't like, a lot of people would be like basketball, but like, no, if you know about the topic, like, I think that's what students do is they put pressure on themselves. Like, my students were doing like an essay last week, the overrated prompt. And I had one student say, like, I want to write about the Electoral College being overrated because we're learning about it in AP Gov. And I feel like I could really write a strong essay. I was like, great, go for it. The girl sitting next to her was like, I'm also in AP Gov, but I really don't think I could write as good of an essay about that topic. And I was like, cool, that's fine. What could you write about? And she's like, runway fashion being overrated. And it was a good essay. So you don't have to like, I actually had an essay about how Dance Moms was overrated. It was hilarious. So you don't have to choose these fancy topics, but make sure that you know your rubric. You want specific evidence, you want developed commentary. So don't put the pressure on yourself to be fancy. Write about what you know well. Let's see, we got a question here on YouTube. Do you have any advice to get better at AP Lang multiple choice? Okay, so good question. Yes. So it kind of depends on which part we're talking about, like reading or writing. But for the reading, definitely practice using the SAT or ACT, because those nonfiction passages can be really helpful. I would try to identify which question types you do well with and which ones you struggle with. So are you good with like ones that ask about a specific paragraph and like the function of it? Are you good with the vocab questions? For vocab, always remember that like when they say something like, how is this word in line 55 being used or whatever it says, read the surrounding sentences too. Don't just go to line 55 and don't just go to the sentence that it's in. Read the surrounding paragraph because there's almost always a context clue that students miss if they just go to that one line. But there are a lot of questions on the multiple choice that are very direct. So if you're struggling with multiple choice, focus on the ones where it's explicitly stated in the passage, as opposed to kind of like the interpretive ones. For the writing multiple choice, to get better at that, definitely practice with some ACT or SAT questions about transition words, adding or deleting sentences, logical order. Those ones are kind of the hardest, but kind of thinking about like what's the best order for things, combining sentences. So definitely practice by figuring out what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. Because if you know which questions you're good at, you'll know to kind of trust your gut, hopefully, and to prioritize those questions. But if you know that you're struggling with something, now is the time to get that extra practice. And a lot of times you can use release tests to practice that. And then there's also questions on AP Classroom. I do have some videos on YouTube about different multiple choice tips. I can't, because of copyright, I can't put specific questions in the videos, but I do go through a bunch of tips as well. So if you want like specific tips for like reading or writing multiple choice, I do have some videos about that. But the other thing is like a lot of students struggle with multiple choice, not because they don't know the answers, but because of pacing. Usually it's the reading part that slows people down. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is that you don't want to overthink it. Because I've had a lot of students over the years who are super accurate, but like they spend way too much time on these questions. And so we want to kind of figure out an appropriate pace as well, because pacing sometimes does people in. It's not that they don't know it. They're just really struggle. Okay, difference between AP Lang and AP Lit. AP Lang is nonfiction, AP Lit is fiction. Does the College Board usually give prompts that are clear and concrete for the real exam? Yes. Usually each year there's one prompt that people dislike. I'm not going to lie. But like I feel like they're doing a much better job of making sure that people like have what they need to be successful. I'm not going to say I love every prompt. I'm not going to say that like that there are things that they could, like I'm not going to say it's perfect, but like they do a good job. So I would say last year's exam, the Q3 prompt was hard because it was about, what was it? It was something about timely decisions. And so we got like a lot of students who struggled with coming up with like clear examples that were meaningful. But like the other two prompts were pretty strong. For me, I feel like argument is always the hardest anyway. But yeah, they're doing a good job of keeping things like really clear and stuff. So I wouldn't worry about that. Like their prompts are pretty solid. Like they have vetted them before they put them on the exam. It's not like one person just wrote it and was like, okay, here you go, College Board. Like there's a committee that works on it and like they have a process. So don't stress about that. Also, if you find the prompt hard, I promise you other people do too. So like don't, just because the question is hard, don't give up. Like because seriously, just get those points, have a thesis, have evidence, have commentary. Because honestly, the times when I've scored either like as a reader or at the state level, we have a state mock exam. If it was a hard prompt, then like chances are if you genuinely tried, you could still score well. I've seen people use Taylor Swift verses in their essays and get a 5. That's kind of funny. Honestly, though, like there are some definite AP readers who are Swifties. I don't know that I would catch all the references. I'm going to be honest, unless it's like a TikTok sound from her. But yeah, you can like people have quoted song lyrics. I'm trying to think. There was one. Oh, Hannah Montana. When it was like the essay about being like striving for perfection, I think I saw a lot of like Hannah Montana. And when I was reading at our state mock exam, like the nobody's perfect or whatever. So yeah. Some readers wouldn't get that though, but like I don't know. Just don't say according to Taylor Swift. Do you know how I should study for the AP Lang test? I want to start studying in March. Yes. So here are some things that you can do. And I will do a video on this. I did a video previously a few years ago about how to prepare for the AP Lang exam, but I'm going to update it. So I'm going to do a 2023 version. Now, when that video is coming out, I don't know, but either before March or early March, I will prioritize that. I'm looking to the side because I have like a list of all the videos that I want to make. But here's what I would do. I would start by studying like current events, or whatever you're studying. If you're in a history class and there's certain like people or there's certain like events that you find super helpful or like interesting, I would start with those, like deepen your knowledge about topics that already interest you. Then I would say you should practice timed essays if you're not doing those in class. And also practice your multiple choice. So that I know that's kind of like a quick thing, but like what you can do is start listening to TED Talks or podcasts about topics that interest you to broaden your knowledge. If you like to read articles, read nonfiction, just in case it helps. I can't promise it's going to help, but it could help. But definitely practice timed writing scenarios. You can do timed writes on your own. So you can look at past exams and you can just time yourself. Like one weekend, I would take a prompt that you find, keep it current. I try not to go I try to use everything from like the most recent one. The earliest I'll use is like 2011, but keep it like 2018 and to present if you can, because those prompts are going to be more accurate. But pull up a prompt, print it out if you need to, whatever you want to do. Time yourself for 40 minutes or whatever is appropriate and practice from there. And then find the sample essays that are online, because the College Board puts those out too, and kind of compare your scoring to theirs. Like, how did your essay compare? And that could be a great way to practice. But I will do a more in-depth video on that in the next couple weeks. Okay, we have a couple questions here on YouTube for the overrated prompt. Could one argue that the term overrated itself is overrated? You could, but I feel like that would be a little bit difficult. So, like, yes, you could, but I feel like that might not go over as well as you want, because I feel like it would be hard to prove. Like, it would be very difficult for you to have concrete evidence and commentary for that. So that's not the direction I would go, because knowing the rubric, I don't know that it could be executed well. So I would choose something different. My students who just did it, we had, like I said before, the electoral college. We had standardized testing. We had like valedictorians. Someone wrote an essay about how being a valedictorian was overrated. Someone did runway fashion, like, so really anything. And like, so I don't think that like arguing that the term overrated would be the best way to approach that. I just think it would be too hard to write. Do you have any helpful tips for writing a critical analysis of a book or a poem? Okay, so I've had to do it before, and now that you ask, I'm like trying to put that all together. So usually with like a critique, we want to focus on like you want it to be both what they did well and like what like constructive criticism you can have. And it doesn't have to be 50-50, but usually there's at least an element of praise and an element of constructive criticism. I've never taken an AP class or an exam and don't know how to study effectively. What do you recommend? It kind of depends on like what topic we're talking about. So if we're talking about like, because I teach English, right? But like I had to take other classes in college. So if we're talking about like cramming for an exam in general, I would say Quizlet, which I heard is no longer free. So if anyone knows, let me know. But like Quizlet was super helpful. I don't think they had that when I was in college, but I've had to study for things since. And Quizlet was helpful, flashcards. I find that when I write stuff down, it helps. So what I would do in college is I would literally, like, if I wrote notes in class, if I typed them or handwrote them, I would rewrite them by hand, because there's been studies about like how if you handwrite things, it helps. So I would rewrite my notes. Find a study partner if you can find someone who you can explain it to. that can help. Because if you could talk it out and tell somebody, this is how it is, that can be really helpful. So one of my friends in college was pre-med. And so one day she was like, look, I just need you to like stand there and listen to me for a second. And she was explaining like mitosis or something. Yeah, and she explained it in a way that I understood it, but she was like, I just need to explain this to somebody because I need to like say it out loud so I can make sure I understand it. So it doesn't have to be somebody in your class. It could be somebody who, just is a person. But that would be another way to study as well. Also start studying sooner rather than later. So if you know you have a test coming up on Friday, start studying Monday. Just kind of review your notes. Like let's say Monday, review your notes. Just read through them all. And then Tuesday, you might look at the stuff that you're struggling with. So if there's certain things you're like, oh, I got to go back and revisit that, then maybe that's what you do Tuesday. Maybe on Wednesday you make flashcards. So don't cram the night before. I mean, you can, but like it helps if you pace it out. Let's see. I know I skipped a couple, so I'm trying to go back. I'm really sorry if I skipped your comment. But like, yeah, feel free to write it again if I skipped it. I didn't do so intentionally. You have a state mock exam. When is it? So, okay, this is how it works for us in Arkansas. And it's not every school in the state. It's just like there's this program that some of us are involved in called Arkansas AIMS, which stands for like the Arkansas Institute of Math and Science. Yeah, we're English, so go figure. What we do is usually for our semester test, we have the students do a multiple choice test and a synthesis essay, and we score that for our semester test. That's how we did it at our school. So I score that part. And then what happens is in March, so first week of March, we go to Little Rock because that's kind of centrally located. And I bring my students' essays. So my students are writing their essays on, I believe, February 28th, because we're doing a study session after school, and they're going to do both essays back to back. So that's not how you have to do it, but that's how we do it. And so I bring my students' essays, and then other teachers bring their students' essays. And then the people who work for this organization, they like shuffle it all through, and we all sit at tables kind of like at the real AP reading, and basically they put a stack there, and we have a table leader. Last year I got to be one. I was super excited for the state mock. I'm not an official AP reader, table leader or anything. I am an AP reader, but I'm not an AP table leader for the national exam. But for the state exam, I got to be a table leader. And so we just kind of like would go through and we'd score one set of essays at a time. So we started with rhetorical analysis on one day, we got through all those. The next day we did argument. And that's how our state mock exam works. And then we convert the kids' scores, and yeah, it's kind of nice. You don't have to do it that way, but that's how we do it. There's benefits to that. I'm still doing the reader response. I'm sorry. Reader responses can be helpful, but like they're probably one of my least favorite assignments as a student. So I don't assign them very often as a teacher. I don't know. Just personal preference, I guess. The wording was confusing, and okay, hold on. Does the College Board usually give prompts that are clear? Oh, because you had one that was confusing. Yeah, so normally they are. Normally they're pretty clear. If there's a word in the prompt that they think you won't know, they will define it. Also, if it's synthesis, look at the sources, because sometimes the definition's in the sources too. But yeah, no, they do a pretty good job of making it clear. There have been a few where I'm like, okay, like I can see some students getting tripped up with this, but they try to also, for like the passages and stuff, if there's something in the passage that they're worried students won't know, they'll put like a footnote or an end note at the bottom. So that's when you have like the little number, like it says number 1, and then you go to the end of the passage and it'll say like, okay, here's what it is. So always look at those because sometimes the passage might have like a religious reference or something, and not everybody has the same understanding of that. So like, or it might be like an American thing or a foreign thing, like or like this like random battle that somebody's referencing and no one knows what it is. So always look at like if there's footnotes or endnotes, look at that. It's like if you just try, like just really make sure you're focusing on this is what I think the prompt is asking. Underline it, like turn it into a question. So if it says write about the value of whatever, ask yourself, okay, what is the value of this topic? That can really help as well. Let's see. I think I've answered this, but are the MCQs similar to the ACT? More similar to SAT or ACT? It depends. I mean, they're honestly very similar to both. There are questions on the SAT that are not on AP Lang. So If you're just trying to study for AP Lang on the SAT, don't bother with the evidence questions, like what is the best evidence for the previous question. Those are not on AP Lang. And AP Lang does not have multiple choice questions about graphs. On ACT, that the graph questions are on the science test, so you don't even have to worry about it. But yeah, the SAT is more possibly a little bit more conceptual. Yeah, but honestly, I found that like I've used both for my students and it's been fine. So you just kind of have to know like which questions to prioritize, I guess, but like they both can be used. We've been starting argument essays. I'm getting 2 paragraphs. How do I manage my time? As in, how can I find time for a third paragraph? Are you talking about a third body paragraph? Because if so, you don't technically need one. If you have an intro and 2 body paragraphs, you're okay. You do not need a third body. Now, if you want to manage your time, we got to figure out where you're losing time. Is it because you're spending a lot of time planning? Is it because you're just kind of getting stuck and you're having to rethink things? So it kind of depends on like where it is, but 40 minutes is not a ton of time. So most of my students do an intro and 2 body paragraphs, maybe a conclusion. Very few of my students this year are doing 3 body paragraphs because they want to they really want to try to make the 2 body paragraphs that they're doing as strong as they can be. You just need like technically 2 body paragraphs because you need multiple claims. So, and you want at least 1 body paragraph to be very strong. So if you're kind of like the type who, let's say you're getting like a 1-2-0 right now, it probably means that your body paragraphs are not quite strong enough. So I would focus on making one of them noticeably better because that could help your score. Let's see. I think I caught up with everything on TikTok and YouTube. So any final questions? But thank you all for joining. I know it's kind of late. If you're watching on TikTok, feel free to tap your screen a few times to give it likes. That would be very helpful. Also, please make sure that you're following either on TikTok or YouTube. I'm on both platforms and I'll be going live each week as we lead up to the exam. Not usually at this time, but usually it's Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern. Feel free to reach out, especially on TikTok, ask questions. I can do video replies usually, and that kind of thing. And also feel free to check out either if you're on YouTube, there's some links in the description that might be helpful. And if you are on TikTok, check out my profile in case you want additional resources as well. I'm still doing the reader response. I feel you. I'm sorry. Hopefully you'll get it done soon though. What are you doing a reader response on? Like, what are you actually reading? I'm just curious. Sorry, Kelly on YouTube. I don't know if I'm misunderstanding your question. Would you mind retyping it? It looks like you have either a question or a comment about tutoring. So I'd be happy to address that if you would just mind clarifying for me. Uh-oh, I think I hear crying in the other room. I have 2 little ones and my 18-month-old has not been sleeping super great. I think he's okay though. Let's see. Any more questions? So feel free to ask any remaining questions you have about AP Lang. We covered a lot tonight, so thank you for asking such great questions. How to sign up for tutoring. Okay, so if you're interested in tutoring, I try not to promote this too often because quite honestly, a lot of my content is free because I believe that's how it should be. But if you're looking for additional help, you want private one-on-one help or you want a group class where it's much more interactive, I tutor on a platform called OutSchool. When you sign up for OutSchool, they automatically give you a $20 credit. And so I have classes there that are really quick classes. I have some that are longer, so you can sign up through OutSchool. There should be a link. If you're on YouTube, check the description of the video. It should be there. If you can't find it, please reach out to me. You can either email me, coachhallwrites@gmail.com, or you can reach out on Instagram and I can send you the links if you're having trouble finding them. But yeah, I'll be offering some classes as the exam gets closer. Last year, I did a bunch of 20-minute sessions with students. And it was just like a quick exam prep, and it was super fun and super helpful. So there's different options as well, but I'll be doing some like free live stuff on TikTok and YouTube as it comes up as well. But yeah, it's hard to, because I can't, on like these lives, I can't like give individual essay feedback, and that's usually what people want. Or at least like when it gets closer to the exam, that's what people want. So that's one of the things that tutoring is for. Yeah. All right. So I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. So I hope to see you all on a future live. But please reach out if you have additional questions. And I hope you all have a good night. So thank you. All right. Bye, everybody on TikTok. And bye, YouTube.